You can call me Yoshikage Kira. I'm currently 33 years old. Not that you'd care, but I reside in Northeast Morio's Villa District. Also, I've yet to marry. If I were ever to engage in combat, I would win the battle without question.
I think when it comes to villains in media nowadays, there tends to be a lot of trends that take away from the villainous nature of the characters. This isn't a new topic on my channel. It's part of the reason why I wanted to make videos talking about villains, rivals, etc. in media. More specifically video games, but I'm obviously going to branch out if this video's thumbnail and title doesn't give it away. One of these days, I'm going to make a full video about my issues with modern day villains writing. Which, hey, if you guys are ever interested, let me know. But enough of my shilling. I think it says a lot that one of the more intriguing elements to villains is how much of a threat they are, and how they are actually treated as a threat in their own story. It's part of the reason why I was drawn to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Like, you can probably point to a lot of issues with the series, and I've got my own criticisms, but one of the most attractive aspects of the series is the villains. The villains are probably some of the best that fiction can offer, whether it be their designs, their over-the-top personalities, their powers, or even just their character in and of itself. Of course, there's going to be a lot of debate and disagreement on who is and isn't the best villain. A lot of people attribute... Oh, right. I guess spoilers? I mean, we're talking about a particular villain in this video and his name and face is in the title and thumbnail, so you're really coming to a video to complain about spoilers? Of course they are. They always are. I should also say that while I will talk about some aspects of Kira, I do expect you guys to have some knowledge of the JoJo franchise. Not just Part 4, mind you. Regardless, today, we're talking about Yoshikage Kira. Now, whether or not you think he's the best villain in JoJo, I'm not here to argue that. That's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to analyze Kira and talk about why he's an effective villain, especially in today's modern media. I say this because while we did get the animated version of JoJo Diamond is Unbreakable in 2016, 7 years ago, ugh, I'm old. The original manga for this part of JoJo ran from 1992 to 1995, so technically speaking, Kira's an older villain before the turn of the century. And during that time, well, you could get away with a lot more than what the more modern writers and villains could. Like getting off to the Mona Lisa's hands. God, I hope my neighbors didn't hear me when I said that. But here's a question. Who is Yoshikage Kira?
I'm currently 33 years old. Not that you'd care, but I reside in Northeast Morio's Villa District. Also, I've yet to marry. In order to make a living, I work for Kameo department stores. After a long day's work, I return home no later than 8 p.m. I don't like smoking, but do enjoy the occasional drink. I'm always in bed by 11 p.m., and I make it a point to get no less than 8 hours of sleep each night.
If that little monologue seemed to be a bit too mundane to you, that's because that's the point. On the surface, Yoshikage Kira is a normal man who wants to live a normal, quiet life, free from the worries that life can bring. Oh, and indulge in his... Yeah, Kira is a serial killer, one who's been doing his dirty deeds for decades in Morio. And until 1999, he had been successful, for the most part, and due in part to his stand ability, Killer Queen. It's an interesting change of pace for the JoJo characters in the prior parts, specifically the villains. Unlike Dio and the Pillarmen, who had much more grandiose desires, Kira is a much more down-to-earth villain. He's not looking to take over the world, he is not interested in becoming stronger, and honestly, once we get to the second half of the series, the chase after him is quite intriguing, but I'll go more in depth with that later. To make a bit of a long story short, Kira has one simple goal in life: to live a quiet one, to avoid confrontation and again indulge in his vices. Kira tends to be a bit more tame and subdued, especially when, say, compared to Dio. With a few exceptions, like when he's certain that he'll win, he tends to be calm, cool, and collected. And when he does break out into the hamminess, it tends to be done in a more outlandish and terrifying manner. It's also thanks to the voice acting that helps sell this. I know I just used the original Japanese for that clip, but I also want to take a moment and note the English dub voice actor. I know there's quite a bit of a contrast between subs and dubs, but in all honesty, I do appreciate the English dub, especially Kira, who is voiced by DC Douglas, which, if you're not familiar with, is one of the more prominent roles would be Wesker from Resident Evil.
I don't need anyone else. I have big balls.
The way he portrays Kira as a regular person really does fit, but also has this floating dread in the voice work that sells whatever Kira says as a very demented person. I just want to bring attention to the excellent voice work in both versions of the show. Hell, I really do enjoy the English dub for Part 4 overall, because there's a lot of fun moments and execution for the series is really good.
For the love of God, drop the meat!
I also want to draw attention to Kira's design. Now, there's a lot of influence of David Bowie in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I just realized I live in a world where a lot of people probably don't know who David Bowie is. God, that Reaper is inching ever so closer to me with every passing second. I can almost feel the scythe on my neck. David Bowie, aka David Robert Jones, was an English singer, songwriter, and actor who was regarded as one of the most iconic musicians of the 20th century. Thank you, Google! He was a really interesting musician who basically reinvented visual presentation and stagecraft. The guy clearly had an impact on the musical world, and the guy had a very impressive career while he was alive. And considering that Araki, the author of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, has a fascination with music, as shown with all the direct musical references to characters and stands, Vanilla Ice, Crazy Diamond, REO Speedwagon, King Crimson, Foo Fighters, Weather Report, Costello, friggin' Dio! I'm just saying, it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility for Araki to take influence for character design from an actual person who had a major effect on the musical world. More notably, Kira takes influence from the Thomas Jerome Newton persona from The Man Who Fell on Earth film, which David Bowie played. Kira is blonde with blue eyes. He dresses in regular formal suits. Well, regular in the world of JoJo, especially when comparison to everyone else's clothing in the main cast. It adds to his aesthetic and main goal of wanting to live a quiet life and not stand out, while still maintaining his facade of a normal guy so he couldn't be ripped away from... Well, let's talk about Kira's power. Killer Queen.
Deadly Queen.
Doesn't have the same ring. For those who aren't familiar with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I apologize if you aren't, stands are manifestations of a person's soul, each with their own unique abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. Granted, every stand has a use. It's just that some tend to be more suitable for combat, others for tricks, and others for traps. Strength and weakness don't really apply for how a stand can be utilized. Kira's Killer Queen is a powerful stand with its ability to turn anything it touches into a bomb, blow up anything and not leave anything behind. It's a handy ability and one that works for Kira's advantage, as he doesn't want to leave any evidence behind of his crimes. Well, save for...
It soothes my soul and brings relief to my restless spirit.
But then again, he can make the hand fizzle away at any time he wants as well. And while Killer Queen is a strong stand against other combat-oriented stands like Jotaro Kujo's Star Platinum or Josuke's Crazy Diamond, it lacks raw power. However, Killer Queen has additional abilities that play to Kira's strength. Sheer Heart Attack is a remote stand that can operate independently from Kira and also provide a bomb attack. It's also near invincible, but can only attack things with heat signatures. It's a powerful stand, but also has limitations to it as well. Then we get to Killer Queen's third bomb, Bites the Dust, a very powerful ability that Kira can imbue into another person, and should anyone try to learn Kira's identity, it activates. It blows up the person who learns the secret, then creates a temporal loop for the person who is being infected with it, and returns the host back to about an hour before the bomb goes off. To make it clear, Kira gets this in the later half of the series, and after he goes into hiding as another character, Kosaku Kawajiri. Right, should probably bring that up here as well. After a run-in with Jotaro Kujo and Koichi Hirose, along with Josuke Nokuyasu appearing soon after the fight, Kira had to go into hiding. He did this by utilizing another stand user's ability to steal a face from another person, Kosaku Kawajiri, and thus he was able to hide away. During this time as Kosaku, Kira had to deal with not only becoming a totally different person, but also had to hide his murderous tendencies. As we learned through the investigations from the protagonist, we learned that Kira is a creature of habit, and has a weird tick that is tied to his murdering desire. The longer that Kira goes without killing someone, the faster his nails grow. And as they grow rather long and have been quite a bit, to the point where he makes it a hobby of his to collect the clippings in small jars. Yeah, I know, it's JoJo. You gotta expect this kind of weird. And during this time while Kira was hiding as Kosaku, the longer his nails grew, the more that his desire to reveal the real Yoshikage Kira to some girl grew as well. In case it wasn't apparent, Yoshikage Kira is a demented serial killer, under the guise of a normal person, but will kill plenty of women and take their left hands as his girlfriends, preserving them until they begin to rot. That is Yoshikage Kira. As I've said, Kira is a more down-to-earth villain, and it works with this part. And this is a personal aspect, but one of the many reasons why Part 4 is one of my favorite parts of JoJo is that there's a stark contrast to the previous part. Part 3 was essentially a around the world in 80 days adventure, and Part 4 was a more down-to-earth feel with the localized location of Morio. The previous villain, Dio, was a 100-year-old vampire, and meanwhile, Kira, for all intents and purposes, is just a random person who got lucky, has a little cunning, and of course a powerful stand that allows him to indulge in his vices quite easily. The element here is, well, human. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate Dio and the Pillarmen, they are excellent villains in of themselves, but Dio had rejected his humanity and the Pillarmen weren't human. Kira is just a human with a stand, mind you, but he doesn't have any real aspirations and willingness to take over the world. If anything, that also plays in the element of Part 4, since his mundanity of just living in Morio gives a bit more of a creep factor to the villain because he just blends in. Like, if you look at a character like Dio or Cars, they're very iconic, but their designs are very outlandish and they tend to be very boastful for their desires so everyone can be aware of their intentions. In contrast, you've got Kira, a serial killer who could be anyone in town of Morio. Hell, the town in and of itself doesn't even know that there are serial killings going on because of Kira's ability to blow the people into nothing. If you really consider it, if the plot of Part 4 worked for our protagonists, Kira could have just killed off countless young women in Morio and nobody would be aware of it. Whereas, if you got the more exuberant villains who stand out, the point of Kira is to blend in with the crowd. He comes off as mundane and uninteresting, even to the point where as a kid he didn't stand out too far and came in a lot of competitions in third place so he wouldn't stand out. A face in the crowd, as it were. We live in a large world and it's easy for people to see who are in the spotlight and determine whether or not they're good or bad people. But the people in the street? Well, they're a mystery as to who they really are. You never know what masks people wear when they're in public, and who they really are in private. It's the unknown, and that's a good element for a villain, because on the surface, they are living a charade to hide the true self, to be a mundane and uninteresting so he couldn't stand out and draw the attention of others, all the while hiding his true form. And that is what a true monster is. Kira's design also adds to this. Sure, Kira is a handsome man, but doesn't really stand out from the rest of the cast in Part 4. If you were to compare Kira to a lot of the other character designs, they did have a lot more outrageous elements, and make them stand out. For example, Josuke's got his hair and pins on his uniform, Okuyasu, or Rohan's hair and accessories. Kira's design is rather plain, especially for JoJo standards. The most he gets is a killer queen tie, and it isn't until he acquires Bites the Dust that his hair changes into a more drastic and unique styling. Before he gets the boost to his stand, Kira tends to be a lot more stoic unless really enraged. It's what really made Kira stand out as an antagonist in JoJo, since I've been saying he only has one goal: to live a quiet life. And funnily enough, Kira does get what he wants when he changes his face and becomes Kosaku. He got everything an every average person wants. He's got a home, a job, a family. There's just one problem. That's not his life. He can no longer be Yoshikage Kira. He has to take the life that he stole and leave Kira locked up in a cage within himself. And that's hell for him. You watch as Kira slowly begins to grow more and more unsettled. All because he can't contain his vices, his habits, his desire to show the real Yoshikage Kira to someone.
We're all forced to live out our lives concealing our deepest hopes and fears. But to forever keep them to yourself, can one truly live out their days behind such a veil of secrecy?
For all extents and purposes, Kira has what he's always wanted, a quiet life. But it's not his, and it burns him up inside that he has to control his urges. And you can't help but watch, holding your breath as you see him edge closer and closer to reverting to his true self.
Do it. Bare your heart to her. Show her your true self. Yoshikage Kira.
The funny thing is, if Kira didn't kill people, he could easily have his quiet life. And here's the thing, Kira doesn't have a traditional tragic backstory. If anything, he was a spoiled brat, and even in death, Kira's father was willing to allow his murderous son to keep up with his terrible tendencies, creating a monster in the process. If you were to say compare Kira to Dio and their backstories, Dio was living in squalor and an abusive household, having to gamble over chess games to earn any sort of money. It was a life that turned Dio into a bitter person who was willing to throw away his humanity due to how crappy humanity had treated him in turn. Meanwhile, Kira is essentially a spoiled brat. Kira's family was well off, and he essentially got a full-on home when his parents passed away when he was younger, and when he got his stand, Kira was capable of indulging in his murderous vice and being able to easily eliminate his targets without any evidence that could lead the police to him. Both characters are terrible people, and that monsters can be created from anywhere, and that even spoiled brats, those being handed anything they want at a young age, can be just as bad. It's a message that shows that parents do need to set boundaries and not allow their kids just do what they want. Bit of an extreme case, I'll admit, but it's still a message to consider, especially since Kira can be a very entitled person, wanting a quiet life but willing to snuff out any young woman's life who catches Kira's eyes. While it's not the traditional tragedy that we're used to, it's still tragic in a means that Kira's fetish that had a mundane start, but his parents did nothing to really help their kid as he got worse and worse. If anything, Kira's father Yoshihiro pampered Kira, and that in turn turned him into an entitled serial killer. Enabling is another form of neglect since it isn't actually nurturing a kid. Which leads us into the next section. Now, as a villain, you need to make them a threat to protagonists, because if they aren't a threat, then what's even the point? Well, you wouldn't be a villain, you'd be a joke. So in order to be a productive villain, you need to be able to establish a threat to the main cast, because if there's no stakes that the villain creates, again, what's the point? For Kira, we got a few ways as to how he's a threat. The mystery of who he is, where he is, and his versatility with his abilities. The first two go hand in hand. If you're looking at the anime version of the part, we're introduced to a severed hand that breaks up the mundane morning and the colorful setting of Morio. This shows the audience that there's a dark shadow looming over the regular town, and it's one that the normal folks are completely unaware of. An evil that you're not aware of is one that really works well, especially in a narrative. We're told of him when the cast meets the ghost of Kira's first victim, Remy. After that, the crew actually comes across Kira incidentally.
Now take a deep breath. He's managed to avoid the police for over a decade, and they're supposed to be the best. It's not like we're gonna summon him like waving down some taxi by force of will alone. Now stay calm and take things slowly and carefully. So, what did old Rohan have to say?
He said the same thing as you, Josuke.
Be careful, Koichi! You have to be alert when you cross the road!
I'm sorry for the trouble.
Of course, they don't know Kira's the culprit. You just think he's another person in Morio. But that to me speaks of how dangerous Kira is, that you can be so close to a monster and not even realize it. It's really the unknown factor that plays a key role into this killer of a character. Of course, we need to discuss the other reason for his threat level, his versatility with his abilities. Killer Queen on its own is a powerful stand. Like, when used properly, I think it'd be argued to be a very potent one as well. It doesn't have the ability to stop time, erase time, or see the future. Rather, it has the ability to turn anything, living or inanimate, into a bomb, all with a single touch. Said bombs don't seem to affect the environment, and despite the loud sound effects, are apparently silent to people. I mean, if they weren't, then that kinda would announce to the world that tactical nuke incoming! But all in all, it's a terrifying stand that can be extremely deadly, especially since it can vaporize people within seconds when the bomb goes off, even more so when Kira can turn the bombs to be detonated at will or have them be triggered. Granted, this ability has a few weaknesses to it. If Kira or Killer Queen cannot press their thumb against their index finger's middle phalanx to trigger the bomb's detonation, the target cannot blow up. The bombs have similar properties to incendiary bombs, which means that it requires air to be used, and only one bomb can be made at a time. Even with these limitations, Kira is able to make use of the ability. After all, most of the time, part of the strategy in JoJo is understanding the capabilities of stand users. And anything being a bomb is something that most people wouldn't be able to plan against, and if they do, it'd be more paranoia being a factor, as anything could be turned into a bomb that could kill you almost instantly. Kira's other ability, Sheer Heart Attack, is a branch off Killer Queen, acting as a remote stand that has a similar ability, and although it's near invincible, it isn't the greatest automaton, where it can only track heat sources and attack them. Then there's Bites the Dust. I've already explained it, and considering that this ability can be only undone if Kira removes Killer Queen from its host or if Kira dies, it's a very powerful ability. Later on in the final fight against the JoJo the Part Josuke, we see Kira use another stand user, Stray Cat, to turn invisible air bubbles into floating bombs. This shows that Kira can think on his feet and use any advantage that he can. Then again, even as a villain outside of combat, Kira has also been shown to be an analytical person. He's able to think on his feet rather quickly. For example, cutting off his hand in order to have Sheer Heart Attack go wild and act as a decoy so he can escape. Granted, backfired since Josuke's crazy diamond ability to recombine the hand to Kira happened and led them to him, but even that worked in Kira's favor, since the person losing a hand can be a signifier to lead people to find Kira even after he changed his face. Back to my point, Kira is also a threat as we see him use his power against a powerful stand user, Shigechi, Kira being able to outsmart and kill him in the span of 5 minutes. And we managed to establish Kira as a threatening villain, just like that. Of course, when you have a villain, you also need a hero to face against said villain. And some of the best heroes versus villain dynamics also make sure that both parties have a clear opposition between the two of them. This can be done as simple as conflicting designs, like, for example, having a character wearing red fighting a character wearing blue, going with the blue Oni red Oni trope. Or their abilities are conflicting with each other even though they do have similar sets as well. It could be something as simple as using a similar weapon. And the same can be said for the main character of JoJo Part 4, Josuke Higashikata. I will say, one of the biggest criticisms that I have with Part 4 is that Josuke sometimes falls out at the wayside of being the main character in his own part. I'm not saying that he gets shafted the whole way, mind you. He still has a lot of awesome moments.
Crazy Diamond!
God, I still love that scene being animated years later. But there was a bit of an oddity of Part 4 with Josuke as the main character, and one that I do hope to make a video about, because I do like Josuke as a main character, but he does have his flaws in his own story, and if you're interested, please consider typing in the comments, Crazy Diamond! And if we get about 10k likes on this video, I'll make a video talking about Josuke as a character in the future videos. But for the purposes of this one, if we compare Josuke and Kira's designs, you can already see that their design work, they do oppose each other. Josuke's color palette is much darker with his outfit and hair, meanwhile Kira's blonde hair and lavender suit bring this into as well. They're conflicting color designs due to how their brightness and darkness works. Hell, the designs themselves can also do this too, since Josuke's design in and of itself is that of a Yankee, basically a Japanese delinquent, and as such is seen as a troublemaker and a stain on society. In opposition, Kira's clean-cut suit and his job as a salaryman make him out to be a respectable Japanese member of society. Of course, we as the audience know this is to be the opposite. You also have to consider their abilities. I'm not going to rehash for a third time about Kira's abilities, but for the sake of brevity, I will with Josuke's. Josuke's Crazy Diamond is a very combat-focused stand, having some very powerful physical abilities to it, such as strength, speed, and precision. But it also has a secondary ability, Restoration.
Crazy Diamond! 直して材料別のところまで戻す
It's an ability that allows Josuke to do quite a variety of things, but to put it simply, Josuke has the ability to repair organisms and objects. This can also revert chemical changes or turn things back to their base components. And if you're like, Angelo, you get turned into a rock. I'm sure with that description, you can see how this ability is diametrically opposed to Kira's. Kira's ability is all about destruction. Meanwhile, Josuke's ability is about repairing. The two characters are essentially direct oppositions to each other, and when the two do meet in the final confrontation in the park, the battle between them is a real nail-biter. Not only because both of the users use their stand abilities in very creative ways, but also because their fighting styles actually clash very well. Getting back to how they use their stand abilities in creative ways, Kira using the aforementioned air bubbles to attack Josuke from a distance, and Josuke uses his own blood to shoot glass tracking bombs to get Kira from a long range as well. It's all the more satisfying to watch Josuke land blows. Of course, I've got my criticisms of that too, but that's for another video. Remember, 10k likes. In any case, even when he bites the dust, this dichotomy between Kira and Josuke makes more sense, especially since Kira's outfit and hair go to pure white at this point. Well, save for the black streaks, but you get the point. And frankly, I kinda wish we had more confrontations between Josuke and Kira, because when you think about it, they do have a good hero and villain dynamic going on here with these design elements. But I'm sure this is a question on everyone's mind right about now, after watching everything that I said in this video.
Okay, but why though?
I make it no secret that I love talking about villains on this channel. Hell, rivals too, and I'm hoping to expand more into character archetypes and subtypes in the near future. But to propose the question again, why is Kira a good villain? It's because he doesn't fall into the same trappings a lot of other modern-day villains have, and he breaks the mold for what a lot of JoJo villains were up to this point. I've already extensively explained that Kira as a villain in comparison to the major antagonists in JoJo is different, so I'm not going to repeat myself. What do I mean with the breaking of trappings of modern-day villains? Despite the fact that JoJo Part 4's initial manga run between 1992 and 1995, the official anime adaptation came out in 2016, 7 years ago. Kira's model of a villain is reminiscent of the 90s elements because he was from that time period, and it shows. The guy is a psychopath. He doesn't have the traditional tragic backstory. He has style. He has his own goals, and most of all, he comes off as an actual person. What I mean to say is that he has flaws. His entitled attitude as a character has clearly given the guy a superiority complex, as demonstrated when he underestimated Jotaro Kujo when he was wounded. And then or when he believes that he outsmarted Hayato and allowed his ego to get the better of him, that he proclaimed his name, allowing Josuke to hear it. These are idiotic aspects to Kira, but that's also the point. Kira isn't some vampire chess master, nor is he a battle-hardened warrior like the Pillarmen were. He was a spoiled brat. And here's the thing, while that was his major weakness, it wasn't used as a joke. A lot of villains nowadays are made to be incompetent, or they do things that are so absurdly stupid that it makes you wonder how they even succeeded at being a villain in the first place.
I'm going to leave them alone and not actually witness them dying. I'm just going to assume it all went to plan.
Kira isn't a perfect human, and it's his ego that gets the better of him, but he still had a lot of moments of competency and was a real threat. He isn't made into a joke character, he's an actual threat, and the chase after him is an actual goal that you can root for. It also reflects how Kira is a villain. His strength comes from his ability to hide in the shadows, even reflected in his abilities, creating a bomb from an unknown object, using the long-range sheer heart attack, and even bites the dust to hide his current identity from the people chasing after him. These are abilities that allow Kira to not actually fight directly against people, and despite his words to Shigechi,
Of course, if I were ever to engage in combat, I would win the battle without question.
it's reflective of a cowardly narcissist, and it's reflective in his abilities, actions, and behavior. It's a rarity to see such a villain like that in modern day. And frankly, Kira isn't a modern day villain. As stated, he's from the 90s, and it shows. He's a disgusting human being, and for a villain, that's great. I've talked about good and bad villains for a while, and frankly, I believe that Kira is something that a lot of villains nowadays should be. Absolute scum, but with a misleading outer shell. Powerful, but not perfect. Have flaws, but not have the flaws override his high points of being a villain, and of course, his death is iconic for this, because he dies twice. Kira gets the ending that he deserves, with his first victim getting her revenge, and Kira being dragged to hell, where he can never have a quiet existence. It's something that a lot of villains kinda deserve nowadays, but a lot of villains either get redemption, or their deaths are less impactful. And Kira's death? It's satisfying.
Shall not go unpunished. Thou shalt perish in the twilight of Anor.
Yoshikage Kira is a good villain. He fits with the smaller, localized setting of Morio. He has an amazing power that fits for not only his desires, but also his character and representation as such. But he's also just entertaining. Now, whether you agree with me or not, that's up to you. I'm sure that people will probably say that in comparison to other JoJo villains, Kira is lacking, and perhaps you're right. I'm not going to pretend that Kira's writing is perfect. Trust me, I don't think that he's a perfect villain, just that he's a villain that's done right. But regardless, I want to thank everyone who watched this video, and hopefully we can do more videos like this where we talk about villains specifically. I'm still working on the AI character video, so expect that next month, and thanks again for watching. I'm Manga Common, and remember... So, let's talk about... Oh, shut up! So, back in 2021, I talked about Mary Sue characters in this video. What the fuck? While it's not a home run, I like to think that video did well enough on its own, but it's been almost 2 years since that video. I've talked about various characters, topics, and tropes, and I honestly think now's a good time as any to talk about an older topic, this time around with a new fresh coat of paint. I mean, come on, what better way to start off the year than a video talking about bad writing? Oh, my life is miserable. Hi, I'm Manga Common, and welcome to my hell. We're talking about Mary Sue. Before we start the video proper, I want to clarify a few things. The first is that I still stand by my original video. I think Korra from Legend of Korra has traits of a Mary Sue, Rey from Star Wars is a Mary Sue, and Giovanni Giorgio, well, he's grown on me, but still has traits of a Gary Stu. The thing is, Gary Stu, Mary Sue, whatever, has become such a watered-down term nowadays. Now, a lot of terms that we use in the modern day have become so diluted that they lost their meaning. These buzzwords and literary aspects get tossed around by dopes like me on the internet so much just so we can get the best win against other people. It is tiring. So, to combat this, we need to give what I believe to be a Mary Sue a proper definition. Not only so you people can understand where I'm coming from, but also so we can be on the same page. A Mary Sue is a character that is seen as too perfect and almost boring for a lack of flaws, originally written as an idealized version of an author in fanfiction. Now, I could take the boring YouTuber route and talk about the origins of a Mary Sue, how it was originally from Star Trek fanfiction, but that to me just is tired and really annoying. Come on, if you're watching a video about Mary Sue, you probably already know about the history of them. So let's talk about a few conceptions and misconceptions of Mary Sues. The first is this.
I don't buy the Mary Sue thing anyway. I find the term sexist in itself because it's Mary Sue. I don't think there's a thing called Ryan Craig.
While yes, the term did indeed originate from a female character and can widely apply to a majority of female characters, that doesn't mean that male characters can't also be Mary Sues. As I've alluded, they already have a term called Gary Stu or Marty Stu, or whatever iteration have you. I do not view the term as sexist, mostly because we're talking about fictional characters, and frankly...
She's not real! But I am real! As real as your love for each other.
But also there have been many male characters who have been lambasted in the past for being called Mary Sues or the male equivalent. Allow me to sing you the ballad of Kirito from Sort Out Our Line. I'm not actually going to do that because I actually care about my sanity. The truth is, Mary Sue is a universal term, but at the same time, it's devolved to talk about characters that people just don't like. I will also say that saying something like, "I've never heard a male character be called a Gary Stu," raises a red flag to me. I think you need to step out of your little bubble and look. For years, in a simple Google search will have people discuss many characters